I never thought I'd be the one to discover a secret that could tear apart my closest friendships. It was just another Friday night, the kind we'd had countless times before. Our group of friends had planned to meet at our favorite wine bar downtown, a cozy little place with dim lighting and an extensive wine list. I arrived early, as I often did, to secure a good table for our group. As I settled into a corner booth, nursing a glass of Merlot, I let my eyes wander around the room. That's when I saw him. Paul, my best friend Diane's husband, was sitting at a table across the room. At first, I thought nothing of it. Paul often had business meetings, and it wasn't unusual for him to be out on a Friday evening. But then I noticed the woman sitting across from him. She wasn't Diane. She wasn't anyone I recognized. And the way they were looking at each other, heads bent close together, fingers occasionally brushing as they reached for their wine glasses, made my stomach churn. I tried to convince myself that I was misreading the situation, that there was an innocent explanation. But then I saw Paul lean in and kiss her, not a friendly peck, but a deep passionate kiss that left no room for misinterpretation. My world tilted on its axis. Paul and Diane had been married for 10 years. They were the couple we all aspired to be, always supportive of each other, always in sync. How could Paul do this to her? How could he betray Diane like this? I sat frozen in my seat, my wine forgotten, as I watched them continue their intimate conversation. Part of me wanted to march over there and confront Paul, to demand an explanation. Another part of me wanted to pull out my phone and take a picture, to have irrefutable proof of what I was seeing. But I did neither. I just sat there, feeling sick to my stomach, as the minutes ticked by. When I saw them preparing to leave, I panicked. I couldn't let Paul see me. I ducked my head, pretending to be engrossed in my phone as they walked past my table. Once they were gone, I let out a shaky breath, my mind reeling from what I had just witnessed. I had barely composed myself when the rest of our friends started arriving, Diane among them. She looked happy, relaxed, completely unaware of the bomb that was about to detonate in her life. I plastered on a smile, trying to act normal, but inside I was screaming. How could I sit here, laughing and chatting, knowing what I knew? The evening passed in a blur. I barely tasted the wine, barely heard the conversations swirling around me. My eyes kept darting to Diane, sweet, trusting Diane, who had no idea that her world was about to be shattered. And when Paul showed up an hour later, full of apologies about being held up at work, I felt physically ill. I watched him closely throughout the night, looking for any sign of guilt or discomfort. But Paul was the perfect actor. He was attentive to Diane, laughing at all the right moments, his arm casually draped over her shoulders. If I hadn't seen what I saw earlier, I would never have suspected a thing. I left early that night, unable to bear the weight of my knowledge any longer. As I lay in bed, sleep eluding me, I wrestled with what to do. Should I tell Diane? Should I confront Paul? Should I keep quiet and hope it was a one-time mistake? The questions chased each other around my mind, leaving me exhausted and no closer to an answer. The next few days were torture. Every time my phone rang and I saw Diane's name, my heart would race. How could I talk to her normally, knowing what I knew? How could I listen to her talk about her plans with Paul, about their future together, when I knew it was all built on a lie? I found myself watching Paul more closely at our group gatherings. I noticed things I had never paid attention to before, the way his eyes would occasionally dart to his phone, the slight tension in his shoulders when Diane would touch him affectionately. Was I imagining these things, or had they always been there, unnoticed? A week after that fateful night at the wine bar, I ran into Paul at our local coffee shop. He was alone, waiting for his order. For a moment, I considered turning around and leaving, but something in me snapped. I couldn't keep pretending. I approached him, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I saw the moment he recognized me, the flicker of surprise in his eyes quickly replaced by his usual friendly smile. But as I started speaking, telling him what I had seen, I watched that smile fade, replaced by shock, then fear, and finally resignation. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to explain it away. He just stood there, looking defeated, as I unleashed all the anger and disappointment I had been holding back. I told him he had 1 week to tell Diane himself, or I would. I saw the panic in his eyes, but I held firm. Diane deserved to know the truth, and if Paul couldn't be man enough to tell her, then I would have to be the one to break her heart. The next week was agonizing. Every time I saw Diane, I felt like I was betraying her by keeping this secret. But I had made a promise, and part of me hoped that Paul would do the right thing. As the deadline approached, I found myself checking my phone constantly, half expecting a call or message from Diane. Would she be angry that I had known and not told her immediately? Would she be grateful that I had given Paul the chance to come clean on his own? I didn't know, and the uncertainty was eating me alive. The night before my self-imposed deadline, I received a text from Paul. He had told her. My heart raced as I immediately called Diane. When she answered, her voice thick with tears, I felt my own eyes well up. We talked for hours that night. She cried, she raged, she questioned everything about her marriage. I listened, offering what comfort I could, all the while grappling with my own feelings of guilt and relief. In the weeks and months that followed, I watched as Diane navigated the aftermath of Paul's betrayal. Some days she was determined to work things out, to rebuild their marriage. Other days she was ready to walk away from it all. Through it all, I stood by her side, a constant support as she figured out what she wanted and needed. Paul, for his part, seemed genuinely remorseful. He ended the affair, committed to couples counseling, and did everything he could to regain Diane's trust. Whether it would be enough, only time would tell. As for me, the experience changed me. I became more observant, more aware of the complexities of relationships. I learned that love isn't always straightforward, that good people sometimes make terrible mistakes, and that friendship sometimes means making difficult choices. I found myself questioning my own relationships, wondering if I could ever truly trust anyone completely. I became more guarded, more cautious in my interactions with others. At the same time, I felt a deeper appreciation for the genuine connections in my life, for the friends who had stood by me and Diane through this difficult time. The incident also forced me to confront my own moral compass. I had always thought of myself as someone who valued honesty above all else, but keeping Paul's secret, even for a short time, had challenged that belief. I grappled with the question of whether I had done the right thing in giving him the chance to confess, or if I should have told Diane immediately. There were no easy answers, and I found myself constantly second-guessing my decisions. As the months passed, I watched Diane slowly rebuild her life. Whether she and Paul would ultimately stay together remained uncertain, but I admired her strength and resilience. She threw herself into her work, started therapy, and gradually began to rediscover her own identity outside of her marriage. Our friend group, once so tight-knit, had been irrevocably changed by Paul's betrayal. Some friends took sides, others tried to remain neutral, but the easy camaraderie we had once shared was gone. Group gatherings became less frequent and more strained, the specter of what had happened always lingering in the background. I found myself growing closer to Diane during this time. Our shared secret, and the aftermath of its revelation, had created a bond between us that went beyond our previous friendship. We spent countless hours talking, analyzing, and supporting each other. In a strange way, Paul's betrayal had strengthened our friendship, even as it had weakened so many other relationships in our lives. As for Paul, I struggled to reconcile the man I had known for years with the person who could betray his wife so callously. When I did see him, usually at unavoidable group functions, I found it hard to meet his eyes. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his actions. Part of me felt sorry for him, seeing the toll his mistake had taken on his life, but a larger part of me couldn't forgive him for the pain he had caused Diane.